Okay, so our last Zoom meeting, we look at exception handling, and then last week for the face-to-face session, Eddie took you guys through the input and output stream, with emphasis on the file input and output stream, looking at the program on the receipt. Okay, how to use the print writer to output your to output your receipt onto a file, whether a Word document or a text document. Okay, so in that particular example, instead of using the system.out.println throughout for your output, this time around you use the print writer as a form of outputting whatever text you have into a Word or a text document. Okay, so if you still have struggles with it, I advise you go back to that particular example in the slides and then in your handout, and then try them out. Okay. All right, so today we are moving to the second part of the course, which has to do with software development. Okay, so if you look at the course code again, it says object-oriented software development. So we've actually looked at the object-oriented concept. Okay, now we're going into looked at the object-oriented concept, also to do with software development. Okay, but today our focus will be on software development, looking at it from the perspective of the graphical user interface. Okay, so far all we've been doing is to develop application or softwares using console programming. Okay, so we write the code and then you see it on your application. You see the output in the form of a text, okay, on your IntelliJ. But this time around, we are going to use or come out with graphical user interface for the applications that we're going to develop. Okay, so that'll be our focus for today. Today's session is to introduce it, and also if we have some time, we look at the first application. From there, we'll look at event handling. Okay, that's when we meet next week, event handling. And then we'll look at how we can add database to the applications we develop. And then if we have enough time, we'll focus on JavaFX, which is also another variant of the Java application development platform. Okay. All right, so let's move straight to page 18 of our handout. All right. So object-oriented or software development using AWT, which is the Abstract Windows Toolkit, and Swing component. Abstract Windows Toolkits and Swing component. Okay. So if you remember from last semester, we said Java is, or we've made it known that Java is an object-oriented programming, and it's based on developing applications which can be console application and also application with graphical user interface, what we call GUI, okay, or GUI, as people would call it. Now, when Java was introduced, the GUI classes were bundled in a library known as the Abstract Windows Toolkit. Okay, so if we say GUI, what we mean is the graphical interface of the application, the graphical interface. So you see graphics like buttons, text field, okay, and so on. However, whatever we'll be doing here is not online based. These are desktop application, or what we also call standalone application. Okay, so they are like applications that you install on your computer at any time. For instance, if we take an application like, let's say VLC, okay, VLC is an application that you will download from whichever website and then install on your machine, or an executable file that you install on your machine. Okay, you don't need internet to be able to use VLC. Okay, so it makes it a standalone application. Okay, another example can be an application like Adobe Reader. Okay, they are standalone application. You download them, get the executable file, and then you install it. So when you install it, it gives you a nice graphical user interface for you to interact with your application. Okay, so we are going to look at some applications in that form. Now, the libraries or the classes for the GUI, okay, the graphical user interface, are bundled into what we call the Abstract Windows Toolkit. Now, these Abstract Windows Toolkits are for developing simple graphical user interfaces. Okay, if we say simple, like to the minimum, okay, but not for developing comprehensive graphical user interface projects. Okay. Now, these Abstract Windows Toolkits are prone to platform-specific bugs. That's to say that when you are using this Abstract Windows Toolkit and you move from like one platform to the other, okay, what happens is that there are bugs or errors that exist. So for instance, if you develop the application in, let's say, in Windows, okay, using your IntelliJ, and it is solely based on the Abstract Windows Toolkit, and you move it to a different platform, like say Linux, okay, or Linux, on the Abstract, on another IntelliJ running there with the Abstract Windows Toolkit, some of the libraries or the classes in there might give you an error, okay, because they are platform specific. Okay. Now, these Abstract Windows Toolkits user interface components are replaced by a more robust and versatile and flexible library, which is known as the Swing. Okay. Now, these Swing components are painted directly on canvases using the Java code. The Swing component depend less on the targeted platform. Okay, so one difference between the Swing and AWT is that whilst AWT is more platform specific, okay, the Swing components do not depend much on a specific platform. Okay, so you can use them on different platforms. Now, they use less of the native GUI resources. Okay, so if we say native, we are looking at the platform specifics UI resources. And then they are designed for developing desktop applications. So like I said earlier, our focus is on desktop applications or standalone applications. Now, when it comes to the use of the swing components, okay, you can just picture it in this form, where you have, you want to come up with a drawing, okay? So if you remember at basic school, where we did pre-technical skills and so on, you need maybe your drawing board. Okay, you need your drawing board. Now the drawing board, you need a paper, you need your desk, you need your drawing board, you need a paper on which you are going to perform your drawing. You also need some form of drawing sets, okay, for the drawing. So the desk carries the drawing board, that carries the paper, which allows, or which also contains the drawing. In application development, the computer screen, also known as the desktop, accommodates a primary computer, a primary container, which acts as the drawing board, which carries some secondary containers like a paper, on which the components of the program are placed. Okay, so it's trying to give you a picture of whatever we are going to do in the form of a technical drawing. Okay, so technical drawing, you have your desk, you put your drawing board there. On your drawing board, you place your paper on top of it. Now, once the paper is on top of it, you have your tool sets, your mathematical set, drawing set, and whatever. And then you use that to start your drawing. Okay, let's likening this, or similarly, we can use the same scenario in the applications we're going to develop. Okay, so you're going to see the application like a form of a container. Okay, so before you start, you need an interface. Okay, so your desktop acts more like your drawing board. Okay, now you need to place your paper on it. In this case, we'll call it a frame. Okay. Then with a frame, you add various components to it, or draw various components on your frame in order to get your perfect drawing. Okay. Now this diagram here, or this figure here, okay, shows some of the components and things that we'll be using. Okay. Now, the root class of all this is the object. Okay, so whatever you are going to develop, or whatever software you want to develop, primarily is seen as an object. Now, if it is seen as an object, it has some form of component. What are these components made up of? They are made up of the container and the J component. Okay, so the container is going to more like hold the components that you place on it. Okay, so for instance, back to the drawing board scenario, you have a container. So the container is more like your drawing board together with your drawing paper, or your paper you put on the drawing board. Okay, now that container is expecting some component or some elements to be placed in them or on them. Okay, so those components are what we call the J components. The J components. Okay, so the J components are things that you are going to place on your container. Okay, now what's the container made up of? The container is divided into two. There's what we call the window and the panel. The window and the panel. Now the panel, you can come up with what we call applets. Okay. However, with the windows gives you frames or dialogue. Okay, frames or dialogue. Now we'll go into each of them and see what they actually mean when it comes to application development. Okay, so with the J component, the components are made up of labels, lists, tables, combo box, sliders, menu, abstract buttons, okay, and so on. Okay. Now, these are the J components are things that you put on your container, okay, to give it a nice graphical outlook. Okay, so your container can be maybe just a white canvas that you've created. Now, the component or the J components are the buttons and the text field and the tables that you put on your container. This I hope we are all following.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, so let's go more into some definitions and keywords when it comes to all that I've been saying so far. Now, the Swing applications are constructed from containers and components. There are three primary containers in Swing, namely the J-frame, J-dialog, and the J-applet. Okay, three main containers of them: frame, J-dialog, and J-applet. Now, the J-frame is used for the application's main window. The J-frame is the application's main window. Now, in this main window, there is what we call an icon. There's a title. There's the minimize, maximize, and close button. And there are some optional menu bar and a content pane. Okay. Now, let me just give you, let me see if I can get some images to describe this. Just a moment. Okay, while I get the image, I'll show that later. Let me just draw something so we can have a picture of it. Okay. So if this is your container, the J-frame, which is something we'll be using a lot, okay, looks something like this. Now the J-frame is just like your typical window that you see, okay? So the window would have maybe an icon here, okay? And then there'll be a title. There'll be a title. Then you have your minimize, maximize, and then your close button. I hope you can all see. Hello?
Hi, sir. Sir, we can see.
Okay. So there are times that there is what we call a menu button, a menu bar here. So the menu bar or menu tab, you see maybe home or file, you see, let's say maybe insert or something, or view, depending on what the application is doing. So many buttons. Then you have a space here. Okay. which we'll call the content pane. The content pane. Okay, so the content pane is where you place whatever button or how you want to design your application. Okay, that is where you place whatever details you want to use in your application. Okay. All right, so let me go back to our interface. Okay. All right, so I have an image here. Okay. So you can see the frame, okay, in this form. Then there's a root pane and so on. Then you have a menu bar. Okay. Now your menu bar has a content pane. Okay. I also use VLC. VLC is a common music player application. Also, let me use that to explain it. So this is a typical frame. So the frame is the entire border of the application. Okay, so that's like the roots or your, what we say, your drawing board. Okay, your drawing board. Okay. Now on that, you have the icon, the applications icon, the title. So in this case, the title is VLC Media Player. Then you have the minimize, maximize, and close button. Then there's a menu bar. So the menu bar, you can see media, which has some files, some text in it with some icons. There's playback, there's audio, there's video with some drop-down menu, and so on. Okay. Now, the actual application has to do with this space here. Okay. So after the menu bar, the things you see in here is what we call the content pane. Okay, so the content pane is where you start actually designing the interface and the functionality of your application. Okay, start designing the functionality of your application. So that's the J frame. Now, then the next container is the J dialog. The J dialog is a secondary pop-up window. Pop-up window. Okay, now this pop-up window usually has a title, close button, and then a content pane. Okay, so these are windows that just pops up, and sometimes the only thing you do is maybe close it, or do you want to accept or reject, or accept or yes or no. They just pop up. For instance, you want to close a particular window or close a particular application. Now, when you click on the close button, you see that some dialog box will just show up, a small window will just show up to suggest to you as to whether you want to close the application or you want to, or are you sure you want to close the application? And then you have options there, yes or no. Okay, that's a typical example of a dialog box. Then we have the J applets. The J applets are used for applets, which mostly are used inside web browsers. Okay, they are usually displayed in web browsers. Okay, however, our course or our focus will be on the window, where the window is made up of the J frame and then the J dialog. Okay, so our examples will be much more focused on these two. All right. Now, then there's a secondary level container, which is the J panel, and then the J window. Now, the panel is a rectangular frame that is used to organize or group related components in a specific layout. Then a J window is also a rectangular surface with no windows control. So the J window is typically used to display information such as copyright and about, okay, and those things. So if you take, let's say, an application, okay, so maybe VLC, and then I go to help, I click on about. This is a typical example of a J window. It shows issues related to copyright and all that. Okay, so if you are developing your application and you need to do that, something like that, you use the J window option. Okay, there's a J menu bar, J text field, and so on. So some example of the Swing components includes J label, text field, button, text area, slider, spinner, radio button, text box, scroll bar, password field, a whole lot of them. Now, depending on the version of JDK you are using, you are likely to get most and even newer Swing components. Are we all here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, to write a Swing application to a top-level container such as JFrame, the top-level container, the JFrame is needed. Now, the components should be added directly to the top-level container. That's your JFrame. They should be added into the content pane. Okay, so like I showed you, the content pane, that is where you add your components. Okay, so basically we'll be doing drag and dropping of this component onto the content pane. They should be added onto the content pane or top level container. You can retrieve a reference to the content pane by evoking the method getContentPane from the top level container, or set the content pane to the main panel created in your program. Now, the Swing application use AWT event handling, where we will focus more on that in our next meeting. Event handling classes, some of which are the action events, which uses the action listener, the key event, key listener, item listener, mouse listener, event window, and so on. Now, these listeners or event, what they do is that they invoke some aspect of the program. So for instance, if I drag and drop a button on my interface or on my panel or my frame, and then I want that button to save something for me. Okay, maybe I've typed someone's name and I want the battery to save the name for me, the button to save the name. Okay, just by dragging and dropping the button there and giving it a name save doesn't necessarily perform any action. Okay, it doesn't perform any action at all. Okay, it's just there as a button. You'll just be clicking it and nothing will happen. Now, if you want to put a functionality behind that button, that is when you introduce the event listeners. Okay, so I want to put some code behind that button so that anytime someone clicks that button, the button will go into the text field and look at the name that was entered in the text field and then save that name. Okay, so that's what, or those are the things the event listeners do in your program. Then there are some methods that we'll be seeing often, like get text, set text, selected, get label, set label, get action command, and so on. We'll be using some of these methods in our program. Okay. Now, let's talk about the graphical user interface. Now, the graphical user interface, when working with graphical user interface designer, you operate in design view, where you are able to drag and drop Swing components within your context, within the context of the form. It must be noted that IntelliJ does not support modeling of non-swing components. The process of developing graphical user interface using IntelliJ involves the following steps. First, you create a new form or a dialog. Okay, so you create a new form. We call it Windows form. Okay, create a new form. Now you arrange your components on the form. You define the properties of the component. You bind the component to a code, a source code. So that's when the coding comes in, okay, making the form functional. You write some codes behind it. And so usually there are two parts when you are doing graphical design. There's a part where you design your interface. Then there's another part where you write your code, making your form or your interface a functional one. Then we have the, you localize the form, and then you can perform what we call preview to see how the interface is looking like and how it's going to function. Okay. Now, one key thing you need to know when you are, after creating the form, before you drag and drop your components, is very key, okay, especially when it comes to Java. It's what we call the form layout. The form layout, okay, is very, very key in developing Java application using the AWT and Swing components. Now, why am I saying it's very key? Now, this form layout or layout managers, if you don't consider them before you start doing your drag and drop, you mess up the entire interface. Okay, so the layout you choose will determine how your components should be arranged on your content pane. Okay, how the components should be arranged. So if I choose a layout, the layout will determine where, if I want to place a button, the button should go to. Where, if I want to place maybe a table, the table should fit into. But if I don't select the right layout, I mess up the whole interface. Okay. So what are some of these layouts? Now, the layout manager are used to arrange the components in a particular manner. Layout manager is an interface that is implemented by all the classes of the layout managers. The following classes, okay, these are the following classes that represent the layout manager. So first, we have the border layout. It is used to arrange components in 5 regions. Okay, so there's a border layout used to arrange components in 5 regions. There's the north, south, east, west, and center. Each region may contain one component only, and is the default layout of frame or window. Okay, so with this part, I'm going to give you an assignment. Okay, now you notice in the handout, I've written out all the layouts. Okay, there are even more layouts. Okay, what I want you to do is to go online and look out for an image of the border layout, how it should look like. Okay, with its parts, and draw it in your notebooks. I'll inspect them next week when we come to class. Okay, so that's your assignment. So if you take border layout, how should the border layout look like? Okay, draw it in your notebook. Okay. if you take your grid layout, how should the grid layout look like? Okay, draw that as well. So let me just show you a typical example of how the border layout would look like. Just a moment. Okay. So this is how the border layout looks like. So with the border layout, you have your button, sorry. So maybe when you want to place a button, okay, you have the top page, which is the north, you have the west, you have the east, you have the center, and then you have the border. Sorry, then you have the south. Okay, so the north, south, your west, and then the east, and then the center. Okay, so that's how the border layout looks like. So it's used to arrange components in 5 regions: north, south, east, west. Okay. So what I want you to do is to get all these layouts and draw them. If you know any other, or you research and you get any other layouts, you can add it to it. Okay. All right. So I'll leave that to you to work on whilst we focus on the first application. Okay. So I'll go to my IntelliJ interface, and then we'll try out the first application. We look at the interface together with what has been explained, or the theoretical parts that we've discussed so far, and see how we can develop the first application in our handout. Okay. All right, so we create a new project as usual. Select your JDK, give it a name. So I'll name this GUI application application 1. Now I go into my SRC folder, right click, okay, create my package. So I can name the package com.gui application 1. And then click on OK. Now in my package, I'm going to create a GUI form. Okay, now instead of creating a Java class, this time we are not creating, we are not going to select Java class. Now go through it, I think it's all the way down. You either see GUI form or Swing UI designer, depending on the version of IntelliJ you are using. Okay, so my first has Swing UI designer. Okay, then when I go there, it shows me the GUI form. It shows me the create dialog class. Okay, we talked about the dialog, but our focus is on the GUI form. So I'll select GUI form. Now give my form a name. So I can name it GUI application 1. Okay. Now, whatever name I give this form is going to be the name of the class. Okay. Whatever name I give to the form is going to be the name of the class. Now, I have a different layout over here I can choose from. Okay. So if I uncheck this, it will not bound the class to the class name to the form layout. Okay, but almost all the time keep it bound to it. Okay. Then the layout manager, like I said, there are a whole lot of them. Depending on the version of JDK you are using, it will give you more layout. I'm sure the latest versions of JDK will give you more layouts. Just that the newer the JDK, you are prone to some error which might happen. Okay. So as mostly, I try to stick to the lowest JDK so that we can get understand the basic of whatever we are doing. Okay. So with the example we are doing or we are looking at, I'll choose the flow layout. Okay, I'll choose the flow layout with the example we want to look at. Okay, so I select my layout here and then click OK. Okay. So now the form that I created has given me two files in here. Two files. There's a GUI application form, which is a .java file. Okay, so let me just open this on my desktop so you can see it. So GUI application, there's the file or the folder. Now I go into the SRC form.gui application 1. I open it. And then what? The form I created gave me two files. There's the GUI application 1.form. And then the GUI application 1.java. Okay, because I bounded it, it gave me, or it named the two files, the class and the form were given the same name. Okay, one is a form file, one is the Java file. Okay, so the form file is where we'll be designing our interface, how we want the application to look like. And then the .java file is where we'll be writing the code to make the interface functional. Okay, so that is it. Now let's come to the application's interface and explore it a bit. Okay. So at least with the project folder, we've seen we are used to this part of the interface. Now let's come to the GUI form. Okay, so let me first close this. So we have here the application, a GUI application 1. This is the Java file, but our focus is on the form. So I'll double click it. And then when I double click, it gives us what? The interface to our form. Okay. Now the interface has these various windows. There's what we call the component tree. There's a component tree. Okay. Just a moment. All right. So there's a components tree, which is here. Yeah, let me see if I can maximize a bit so you can follow. Okay. So we have the components tree here. Now the component tree has the form which we created. So com.gui application 1.gui application 1. Then there's a J panel. Okay. That's one window. Then we come down here and then we have property. Now, if you remember the rules, said that what we have to give properties, set some property values. Okay, so for instance, if we say property and we take a button, what is the name of the button? We set the button there. What color do you want the button to be? How do you want the button to look like? Okay, you set all those properties. Then you have the show expect properties. Okay, so these are more or some additional properties which are more higher than the basic properties which you can also add to your text, your interface. Now, what we have here is our panel. This is our J panel. Okay. Now, on this panel, we are going to perform our we are going to drop what we call the components onto the panel. Okay. So you can see I've selected my panel. So this is my more like my content pane. Okay, where I'll be dragging and dropping how I want my interface to look like. Then we come to the left, the right-hand side, we have what we call the swing component. Okay. Swing component. So we have the H spacer, V spacer, J panel, scroll bar, button, radio button, checkbox, label, text field, password field, formatted text field, and all. Okay, so with the Java JDK we are using, these are what we have. However, if you are using, like I said, a higher version of the JDK, it gives you more options. Okay, it gives you more options. Okay. All right, so we want to look at the application on our in our handout. We want to look at this application. Now, this is a counter. It's a counter application. Now, the application has some menu bars. So we have the file menu, edit, and help. Okay. Now, inside the file, there's new, open, close, exit. There's the edit window, also has some details there. Okay. Now, basically, the application we want to design should have a label. Okay. Now, this label, we are going to name it counter. Then we will have a text field, which will take in numbers or display some numbers for us. Then we are going to have a button name count. Now, with this button name count, anytime you click the button, a function should trigger the numbers here to increase by 1. Okay, so at the moment, the number is 0. So when I click on it, it increases by 1. Okay, to perform that count by 1. Okay, so this is the example we are going to look at, and we'll see how we can accomplish this in IntelliJ. All right. Please, any questions so far? Any questions? Any question? Any question?
The installation of the GUI, please, can you go about it? The classes and everything.
Installation of GUI. We've not installed GUI. It's the same IntelliJ.
How you created the classes of the GUI.
Okay, so, but do you know how to create a class in Java?
Yes, sir. I know.
So first you right click on your SRC, go and select package. You give it a package name. Okay. Now after giving it a package name, the package shows here, com dot whatever name you give it. Now right click on that package name, the same way that we used to create a class. Okay, that same approach. But this time you don't create your Java class. Rather, you go all the way down and look for Swing UI Designer or GUI form.
Okay, sir.
Okay, GUI form. Once you select it, it gives you this dialog box here. Okay, now this dialog box, you just give it a name, a form name. Now, whatever name you give it, automatically will create a class for you. Okay, and give the class the same name. So you give it the form name, and that name will be bound to the class. And like I said, you should always select the layout you want to use. And I've given you an assignment on the layout. Okay, select the layout you want to use. Now, when we come to the component on the left-hand side, sorry, the package, you see that what it's created two files for you. One is the Java class, and the other is the form.
Okay, sir.
All right. So now, like I said, our emphasis is on the form. If we want to design our application, okay? So the first thing I have here is the panel. These are form. On the form, there's the panel. Okay, so look at the drop down, the arrow here. This is the form. So the form is what we have here. Now on the form, we have a panel. This is the panel, the space over here. Okay. So we need to give it a name. Okay. Now, there's what we call a field name. A field name. Okay. The field name is the name that we are going to use in our code. Very important. Is the name we are going to use in the code. Okay. So if I put a button there, I have to give the button a field name, because that field name is what I'll use in the code anytime I want to add some functionality to the button. I have to call that button by its field name. Okay. So here, I'll give our panel, which is what we have here, a field name. So I'll say frame panel. Now take note, the field names follow the rules of identifiers we talked about in level 100. Okay, their names we'll be using in the code. So as much as possible, you make sure that they follow the rules of variable names or identifiers. Okay. Now, after doing the field name, some of the properties here, we will not touch them for now. The next thing is the layout. So if you were not able to change your layout earlier when you created the form, you can now come here and change it. Okay, because it's on the panel that you are going to now do your drag and drop. So make sure you give it a layout, okay, which you want it to follow. Then you can now do your drag and drop. Okay, now we are using a flow layout. Okay, so maybe let me just show you the flow layout and how that looks like. Okay. So Just a moment, let me get an image of it. All right, so this is how the flow layout looks like. Okay, it arranges your components horizontally. Okay, so you can see in this layout is more in a drag and drop fashion. Okay, so when you drag, automatically the first button you put is arranged in horizontal format from the top to the down. Okay, but usually done horizontally. Okay, so that's the flow layout. Okay. So we've chosen the flow layout. Now, how do we want our items aligned? There's border as well. We won't play much with that today. So how do we want the whatever we place here aligned? Do we want it at the center? Do we want it at the left? Do we want it at the right? Do we want it to be leading or trailing? Okay, all those options are there. Then you can come to the background. You can set the background color. Okay, so the color has to do with RGB. So R for red, J for blue, G for green, B for blue, RGB. Okay, and then if you know the color code configuration too, you can use that. So hash F2, F2, F2. If you use all Fs, F, 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 it gives you a color black. Okay. Okay. If you use all if you use all Fs, it gives you a color white. If you use all 0, it gives you a color black. Okay. Then you can choose whichever color you want. Okay. So you give it your background color. As much as possible, let's stick to the default background color. Then there is a foreground color. Can also set that your font, can set your font how you want them, and so on. Okay, so a whole lot of properties in there. Okay. So now we want to design our interface. Also, Isaac Tete, when you come to the background color and you click on the value aspect, so there's property and value. Okay, so the value part, you see this folder here. You see a folder here, just click on the folder and then it's going to give you the dialog box for the color. And then you can go into it and select the color you want. Okay. So the default color is F2, 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 F2. That's a bit white with some little bit of gray in it. Okay, a little bit of gray or black in the white, making it not entirely white because white is Fs throughout. Okay. All right, so the first component we want to add is a label. So we are adding 3 components. We are adding a label, we are adding a text field, and then we are also adding a dialog box. Okay, so so this is more like transition to our content pane. Okay, so we are going to add 3 components. The first one is a label or a J label, let me put it that way. Then J text field. Then finally, we add a J button. And note, our layout is the flow layout. It's pardon my writing. Okay. So we are going to add them in this order. Okay. So I go back to IntelliJ. Okay. Look for first a J label. So I drag it. Okay. Now, because my alignment is on center, okay, once I drag it, it comes to the center. Okay. So that's on the panel. Okay. We are on the panel now, okay, which we name the frame panel. So on the center. Okay. Now, the next component we want is a text field. So J text field. So I drag it and drop. And drop, which is the label. So that is here. So label and then text field. Then the next one is a button. So J button, I drag. I can see that when I want to drop, it can only make me drop it horizontally. Okay, if I try to move it down, it can't go down. It only works horizontally, whether to the left or to the right of whatever I've already dropped. Okay, so that is how the flow layout, like I said, is the layout that will help you design your interface. So with the flow layout, this is what is happening. Okay, I want to drop the button here. So I have something like this, label text field button. Okay, so if you look at my component tree, you can see that inside the frame panel, there's what, a label, which I drag and drop. There's a text field here, and then there's a button. So I click it, you can see what they are being selected as I click them. Okay. Now, after doing your drag and drop, the next thing you want to do is to set the properties of this component. Set the properties because we'll be coding with them. Okay, set the properties. Okay. Now, when you set the properties, by default, a code is generated for you in your Java .java file, which is this one. Okay, so when I double click, you can see that what some codes have been generated. Private J panel, frame panel. We named it frame panel. So we'll be seeing frame anytime we want to write some code regarding the frame panel. We are going to call this. Okay, the package or the library has been imported, Swing package. Anytime you see this asterisk here, it means all the classes in that package should be called. Okay. Then we have the J text field. J text field here. We are here to set the property, but by default, it's saying that what text field 1. Okay. And then the button also, we are here to set the property, but by default, it's saying that what button 2. Now, what will happen is that if you don't set these properties, okay, in your form, if you don't set the properties, and let's say you are using about 5 text fields and about, say, 5 buttons, it's going to name it button 1, button 2, button 3. Okay, using that nomenclature. button 1, button 2, button 3. What happens is that if the system gives you that form of naming, if you are now writing the code, you might get confused as to which one is button 1, which one is button 2. And you are going to mess up with the functionalities behind those buttons and text field and components that you've added. Okay, so it's always advisable you give it a name, a field name, which is unique or which uniquely defines or describes the button or components that you are using. Okay, so let's take JLabel. Usually the label, you don't give it a name, okay, but to be on a safer side, unless maybe you want to add some functionality to the label, then fine, you can give it a field name, okay? So I'll give it a field name and say counter label, okay? So that anytime I see, so I'll do it L, capital LBL, okay? So anytime I go into my code, I'll see what counter label. So any functionality I want to add to the label or the J label, I'll call it this counter label field name. Okay. Now let's come back. So my label, what am I doing with it? It's still showing here as label. Okay, it's still showing here as label. But I want it to be a counter. I want it to be while you ask the question, I'll address it later. I want it to be, the label name should be counter. Now take notes, there's a field name and there's what we call a text. There's a field name here and there's text. Now the text is the name that will appear on your form or your interface. Okay, so I want to name this text or this label counter. So once I enter the name, counter shows here. Okay, so this is what I want to see. So that's the text. So the text is the name that shows on your on your form or your interface, whereas the field name is the value or the name that shows in your code. Okay, so take note of the two. Now you can equally put an icon or an image in the label. So the label is not only for text, you can equally add an image to it. Okay, so there are some examples we look at which has to do with adding an image. Okay, then you can do label for, you can add text tooltip, tooltip text, which, for instance, it's more like a description, okay, of what the label or the component should do. Okay, so usually if you add a tooltip and you hover your mouse over the text, you see that description pop up. Okay, so maybe I can just put a tooltip there and say this this counter increases your value by 1 as a tooltip. Okay, so anytime I hover my mouse, it gives me the message, this counter increases your value by 1. Then we have some other properties which we won't go into. Like I said, if you hit the expert properties, it gives you more functionality. More functionality. Okay. All right, so we are done with our counter label. Let's move to the next one, which is the text field. So the first thing we'll do is to give the text field also a name. So this text field is for displaying the values. So I'll give it a name. I can say counter text field. So TF. Okay, TF, counter text field. So that I can remember that, okay, this is for the text field. Okay. Now, after doing that, where is it? Counter text field. You can see that the name has now changed from text field 1 to counter text field, or count text field, counter text field. Okay. Now, what other properties can I set for the text field? There are options that are here as column. Okay. So column, I need to set the column. The column has to do with the space in here, in the text field. Okay. So let me just do a preview. Okay, there's a way you can preview it. I'll right click and do preview so that you see how the application should look like. Just a moment. Okay. Now this is a preview. Now you see that this is the counter, this is the label, this is the button. The text field can hardly show. Why? Because the column space there is 0. Okay, so we can't see the text. It's not showing from the preview. So I'll close this preview and then increase the value there from 0, that's the text field, from 0 and then say 10. Okay, so I change it to 10. Now you see that it widens up a bit. Okay, so I can right click and preview again. Now with the preview, you can see what? There's a space, okay, showing there for the text. Make it now a bit easy to see the text there. Now this text field can be enabled or disabled. Okay, disabled. And also can be editable or non-editable. Okay, at the moment, we just want it to display the number. So we don't want it to be edited. So we can work on that property. Okay. And then also the preview gives you a look and feel of the interface. Okay, how you want the app to look like, the look and feel option. There's the metal, there's the Nimbus, okay, there's CED giving you a different look, there's Windows. Okay, so depending on how your interface is, okay, there is Windows Classic and so on. Okay. Now you can see that these are menu bars, okay, but these are preview menu bars. We've not done the actual coding, so you'll see these are just preview menu bars. Okay. So I'll close it and then we'll quickly finish our properties and then look at the code. So we said we are still on the text field. I've changed it to test. I don't want it to be edited. Okay. The fonts, I won't play with that. You can work on the font. Now the text, just like we saw with the label. Just like we saw with the label, the text, we can put a text there. Okay. So in this case, maybe I'll just put 0 there as the text so that anytime you preview the application, you see text there as 0. However, you can't edit it because I've unchecked the editable property. So I can't edit it. Okay. Now, what else can I do to the text field? I think basically that would be it for the text field. Now we move to the button. Okay. So the button too, we are going to give it a field name. So I'll say count button. So button, I can type the button, but I usually use the shortcut BTN for button. Okay, the label, I'll use BLB, LBL for label. Okay, button, counter BTN. So anytime I see BTN, I know that, okay, it's button. You can also write it in full if you want. Okay. So the button, what do I do? I'll give it a text. So the text that I want to see on the button is count. Okay. Now it is count. So if it is count, you can now see it show here as count. But if we go to the code, it's what? Count BTN. Okay. All right. So now I'm done with my interface. Everything is well designed. Okay. So the next thing is to add some functionality to it. Let's just preview it again. So you can see the count, the 0. Okay, when I put the cursor on the count, you remember the tooltip we did. Okay, I put my cursor there. It says this counter increases the value by 1. Okay, my text field is not editable, so I can't even type anything there. Okay, then the count. When I click, I've not added any event or functionality to it. So when I click, nothing happens because it's only a preview. It's only a preview, nothing happens. Okay. All right. So now let's look at the code and try out something. So, yes, let me address Killian's question. So your question is saying that can we use a different layout in this same application? Yes, you can use a different layout. Okay, you can use a different layout. But like I said, it's always best to choose the layout before you start the application. Because if you have already designed the interface and you are now going to, you've done your drag and drop, and you are now going to choose a different layout, you mess up the whole interface. I don't want to try it now because of time. But when you try it, you mess up the whole interface. So you always select the layout first before you go into changing and dragging and dropping your components. Okay. So let's go into the form. Sorry, let's go into the Java and start writing some codes. Okay, very important. I'll be fast with it as much as possible. Okay. All right, so we've written using our flow layout with, okay. So we want to add, we want the button, so the main functionality has to do with the button performing the count. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to add an event to it, because without the event, the button can't do anything. Okay, we have to add an event to it. And the event will usually take the code to help this value change from 0 to 1. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll create an event. How do I do that? I right click on the button or the component which I want to create the event with. Go all the way down to create listener. Okay, create listener. Select it Now, the type of event I want to use is the action listener. Okay, there are a whole lot of them. Next week, we'll talk about them. Action listener. So, because I want an action to be invoked anytime I press the button. So I select action listener, and we'll be using that more often. So it says here, so it's under the abstract Windows toolkit. That's the library. Okay, so action to be performed. Okay, so I just select OK, and then it gives me what? It gives me some set of codes. Okay, so counter button dot action listener, it gives me the method. Okay, now it's saying that public void action performed. Now this is where I write my code. What action do I want to perform? Okay, but before that, you want to declare a variable, okay, and name it number. Okay, so I'll say private int number, and by default that number is 0. So the 0 we see in the text box. Okay, we want to actually declare it. Now, after declaring, what action do you want to perform? We want to add by +1 to the value. So we do plus number. Okay, and if I put plus there, you know what it means. It means +1. Okay, so the number here that we've declared plus, okay, should add 1 to it. Now, this is a pre-increment something. So when it adds the 1, where do we want to see the results? We want to see the results in the counter text field. Okay, which is this place. This is where we want to see the results. So we take that counter text field, counter TF, okay, and then we use the method set text. Okay, so if you remember the slides, there's get text and there's set text. So the get text is when there is a text there, maybe a form, someone is filling the name and you want to save it. Someone has entered the name, so you pick the text there. That's the get text. Okay, but in this case, we want to set the text because what? We are not trying to access it. We just want to make it display, okay, and add some functionalities to it. So set text, select that. After select that, we use what we call the string. Okay, so the text there, the number there, we are seeing it as a string. So string dot value of. Now, what value are we putting there? We are putting the value of the number. So value of number. So the number plus we've done here, when it adds 1 to it, it will set the number inside the text field. So 0 plus 1, it will set that 1 to the text field. And then you see it now appear on the text field. Okay. So this is more like a constructor that we've shown. Okay, a constructor method. And we always say that the constructor always takes the same name of what your class. Okay, so this is a constructor method which we invoked for the action listener. Okay, so now I've finished writing my code, but this code cannot run. Why do you think this code cannot run? Anyone? Anyone? Why do you think we can't run this code?
So because we need to bring the PSVM.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. We need to introduce the PSVM, the main method. Without the main method, we can't run this code. Okay. So the main method should still be in the class. So take note. This is the closing brackets for the class. Okay. So it should be within the class. So that means that after this curly bracket here, which is this for this one, okay, I have to come outside it because it's a method. So I can't create the PSVM inside the method. I have to do it outside the method, but in the class. I can decide to bring it on top of this one. It doesn't matter. Okay. Wherever I put it, it should work. So I'll do my PSVM. Now, after doing that, I'm going to put in some codes there to help me run my interface, to help me run the application. Now, the first thing I'll put there is the JFrame. We want to now trigger the JFrame. Okay, the class for the JFrame. So JFrame, and I've showed you what the JFrame is. We drew the JFrame. It says it has an icon, it has title, and so on. Okay, menu bar, and so on. So JFrame, I'll give it a class, an object name. So the object name, I'll say frame equals new JFrame. Okay. And then I'll give it a name, a title. It's a frame. So we said a frame can have an icon, can have a title, and so on. So I'll give it a name, a title. So I'll say GUI counter, GUI counter application, GUI counter application. Okay. Now, after giving it the name, I need to set this frame, which is the object I've created. I need to set the content pane. Okay. Now, the content pane is where we wrote this application. Okay, this is the content pane, what we've decided here. So it's like now we have our interface. We have our JFrame, which is the green we can see here. And then the purple one here is our content pane. So now we want to put our content pane on our frame. You get the logic. You get the logic.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we designed the frame, the content pane, which is our panel. We designed it differently somewhere. And our frame is there. So we just call the frame. We now want to put this content pane that we've designed into the frame to show on the frame. Okay. So we're going to now say that the frame, which is the frame dot set. So we are going to set the content pane. Okay. Now, what is our content pane? Our content pane is what? This GUI class. Okay. Sorry, GUI method here. So I'll just copy it. GUI. Okay. And say that's new GUI dot frame panel. Okay, so that frame panel is where the frame panel is where we did what? All the drag and drop. Okay, all the drag and drop is inside our frame panel. That means all the labels, all the container is in our frame panel. Okay, so we've set everything there. Now, after setting that, what do we do next? We want to set a lot of things on the frame. Okay, so we do what is called set location relative to now. So we set it to now. That is to say that everything on our frame should be centered, should be within the middle. The location of everything should be in the middle. So we set it to now. And the next thing we want to do again is to set the frame. Okay, we want to add a close on exit. Okay, so we call that the set default close operation. Select that, and then we say JFrame dot exit on close. Okay, to close it. Then we also set what we call frame dot set visibility, okay, which is also an important one. And we set the visibility to true. Okay, so set the visibility to true. And then there is also last one, frame dot pack. Yeah. So the frame dot pack option 2 is there, okay, to bundle everything that we have. And then once you do this, you can run your code. Okay, so I run the code here. So I now have my interface, okay, everything here. Now, when I click on count, because we've now added an event to it, we gave it a name. We said GUI counter application. We have the count. So if I click on count, then plus number, it's now making what? The value here change. Okay. So it keeps changing. It adds 1 to it. It keeps changing. Anytime I click, it adds 1. So that's it for the application. Now, there's no menu bar here. There's no menu bar here, like we saw in the handout. Okay, with the menu bar here, it's not here. So let's write the code to look at that shortly. Okay. Now, depending on the version of IntelliJ you are using, that property is there in swing components. Okay. But in my case, I'm using the lowest version of swing component, so I don't have that property here. So what I'll do is I'll write the code. Okay. Now, I want you to understand the code. When you understand it, it's now easy to develop it becomes easier so that when you do the drag and drop, you can easily modify it, okay, depending on the version you are using. So I'll be doing the coding. Okay. So just before the main method, that's the PSVM, I want to now create a menu bar. I want to create a menu bar. Want to create a menu bar. Now this is how the menu bar looks like. Okay, I've showed it to you already. So the menu bar will be on top of your contents pane. Okay, so you have the title and all that. Then the menu bar will show. So file, insert, and so before the content pane. Okay. So I'll create it, I'll write the code. So private static. So it's a J menu bar. And then I'll name it create menu bar. So it's a method. Now in that method, what do? I call the menu bar package. So J menu bar, give it an object, and I'll say menu bar equals new J menu bar. Now, when I create my menu bar, I need to give it some items. I need to give it some item, okay? Now, because this is a method, I need to add my return value. So I'll say return menu bar. Okay, the menu bar is small m, return menu bar. Now, what do I do inside my menu bar? I need to set the items. What are the items I'm looking for? There are 3 items. Okay. There are 3 items. So we have the first item is file, edit, and help. Then after doing all these 3 items, we come to each of them. So for file, we have in there new, open, exit. For edit, we have undo, count, and check for updates. Then for the help, we have about. Okay. So let's look at them. So first we'll create the menu, okay? We'll create the menu, and then we'll add the menu to the menu bar. So we'll say J menu. So our first one is the file menu. Equals new J menu. And then we are going to give it a text file. Please, you can see that there's an S showing here. This X, I didn't type it. Okay, it's auto-generated. So if you are typing it, don't go and type S. The same way when we're generating the title. Okay, these are arguments to help you know what is supposed to be there. So don't type them there. Don't type this S and the title there. Okay. So I'm going to copy this and edit it for the 3 different menus that we have there. So the second one is edit. Okay, so edit menu. The object name is edit menu. I come to the third one, which is help. So when I come here, I'll say help menu. Okay. So these are my 3 different menus that I'll create. Okay. Now the next thing I want to create is the menu item. So for each menu, there are some items in it. So I create the menu items. Then I'll add them to the file menu, okay, to each of the menu. So this is a menu item for the file menu. Okay, so the file menu, I'll say J menu item. Sorry. J menu item. Okay, so this is a new menu item equals new J menu item. And this one, I'm going to name it, give it a text, new. So you can see this one here, the menu item, there's a text there, which is, I didn't type, it was auto-generated, okay? So I'll do it 3 times. Okay, so let me just do 2 for time's sake. So I'll name this one exit. So new and exit. So exit. Now I'm going to add these 2 the new and exit. I'll add them to the file. Okay. Now I have to create another one. Okay, so I'll copy this and create for menu items for the edit. So this one is the edit menu. Now with the edit menu, the menu item there is undo count. So I'll name it undo, the undo menu item. And then here I'll say undo count. Okay, because the undo count, we want it to reset the count, because when we are moving up like that, it doesn't perform any function. So we want to undo the count. Okay. Then we'll do a last one for the help. So the help, we put the about. So create a menu item for the help menu. And then I'll put here the about menu item, about. Now the text we want to see there is about. Okay. So now I've created my menu bar, created my 3 menu. I've created items for each of the 3 menu. Now the next thing I want to do is to add these items to the menu. Okay, take note, we just created them. Now the next thing we want to do is to add, sorry, it's a comment, add the menu items to their respective menu. Okay. So the first one was the file menu. So the file menu, we have the, so I'll do .add. What am I adding to the file menu? I'm adding the new menu item to the file menu. Then the next item, still on the file menu, I created the exit. So I'll add the exit menu item to it. Okay. Then we come to the edit menu. The edit menu, I created the undo count. So I'll add the undo menu item to edit. Then we come to the last menu, which is the help menu. So help menu.add. What do I add to it? I add about. Okay, so I add the about menu item to it. So now that we've added the menu items to the menu, what we have to do next is to add the menu. Okay, add the menu or the menus that we have to the menu bar. Okay, so take note, initially we just created them. So now we are now going to put them in their respective places. So we add the menus to the menu bar. So how do we do that? The menu bar is what? The name is menu bar, right? So menu bar dot add. What are we adding? We are adding the file menu to the menu bar. So we created the menu bar, we created the menu, we created the items in the menu. Then we came back again to add the items to the menu. By adding the items to the menu, then we add the menu to the menu bar. Okay, so it's like a bottom-up approach. All right. Okay, so we've added the file menu. So now I want to add the edit menu to the menu bar. The next one, I'll add the help menu to the menu bar. Okay. So I think we are done. We'll come to the functionality shortly. So this is how we create the code for creating our menu bar. Okay, the code for creating our menu bar, the menu and the items in the menu. Okay, so after doing this, we need to now add our menu bar to our frame, because we created it separately. Okay, so we need to add the menu bar to the frame, just like we added the content pane, that's the buttons and all that, to the frame. Okay, so I'll come back to my public static void main where we have the frame. And then just in there somewhere, I can say frame dot set J menu bar. Now, what is the name of our J menu bar? It's what? Create menu bar. So we add it to it. Okay. So that means that everything you do, you come and place it. If I design another side of the interface, I have to put it on the frame, because the frame is the entire window I want to see. Okay. So I now come and run the code again. And then this time I should see my menu bar showing. Okay, so I have my file menu, edit menu, and help menu. Now in the file menu, I have what? The new. Okay, now I've not added any functionality to it. So when I click, nothing happens. I have exit. I've not added any functionality to it, any event to it, so nothing happened. I have undo. Okay, then the help, I have about. No functionality added, so nothing happened. Okay, so okay, let me just let's add the functionality to let's add some functionalities before we close. At least I want this video to be good enough for us to always go back and refer to. So let's add the functionality to it. So I'll close this, come back to the code. Now, please, let's take note of something quickly. There's what we call the mnemonics and accelerators. Mnemonics and accelerators. Okay, please take note of them. Now, what do these mnemonics do? Okay, the mnemonics basically are keys that when we press on our menu, okay, they select a particular menu items when we open them. Okay, they select a particular menu items. Then we also have the accelerators as well. Okay, so we call them the keyboard mnemonics and accelerators. The accelerators are key that when we press, it selects an option when the menu select an option within the menu without the menu ever being opened. Okay, so for example, the accelerators are like some shortcut keys that we press. Okay, so let me just show you a typical example of what we are talking about. IntelliJ has that. Okay, so let me use my magnifier to zoom into it so that we can see what we are talking about. So for instance, the application we created had this. It had a file, it had edit, it had view, it had help. Okay, so let me just use the file. Now with the file, you can see that what the F here is underlined. Okay, the F there is underlined. That means that if I want to go to file on my IntelliJ and I press F, okay, let me just select IntelliJ, and I press F. Oh, I hope I'm not messing up any part of the code. Just a moment. Still showing the code, okay? So when I press F on my keyboard, okay, it shows me what? The file menu. Okay. Why? Because this F has been underlined. If I do V shows me the view. If I do N, you can see N is underlined. N will show me navigate. If I do Z, okay, Z here is for analyze. So if I do Z, okay, sorry, Alt Z, it's giving me something else. It's another shortcut on my machine, so it's not working. So let's see, Alt B. Alt B is for build. So that is working. Okay. Then if we come into it too, you can see some abbreviations, some shortcuts. So for instance, if I want settings, setting is saying that what? I should use the key combination of Control, Alt, and S. So if I hold Control, Alt, and S, it opens what? The settings window for me. Okay, so those are the accelerators and mnemonics. Okay, so how do we write them in the code? Let's go back to our J menu, the J menu bar, and then we'll take the menu as we've created them and add some form of accelerators and mnemonics to it. Okay, so first one, let's start with the setting the mnemonics. So we'll do for the file menu. Okay, so file So the mnemonics, we want the F in the file to be underlined. So file menu dot set mnemonics. Okay, so you need to put a mnemonic character there. Okay. Set mnemonics. Now, this time we are using a key event. Okay, so key event dot, we pick a value. Okay, so the value F, VF. Okay, so we choose the first one, F, so that the F value will be underlined. Okay. We can do for the edit too. So edit menu dot set mnemonics, key event dot, what value are we choosing? We can choose another value. Okay, so let's say so let's put here E. So we want the E to be underlined for the edit. Okay. Now let's do the accelerators too. That is where we use the shortcut combination, Control Alt and something to perform those options. Okay. So accelerators. So usually we put the accelerators inside the menu item. So for instance, for exit, okay, for exit, we want the exit to maybe have some Control Alt Delete. Then we can add an action to it. Anytime the person press the Control Alt Delete, it should maybe close, or Control X, Control plus X, it should close the application. Okay, so we'll put the exit menu. So exit menu item dot set accelerator. Then we add what we call a keystroke. So get keystroke. So what keystroke are we looking at? We want the key event dot X, okay, with an action event dot control max. Okay, so that's to say that Control plus X. Okay, so once we've done this, we need to put in an action listener. Okay, an action listener that is going to close the event, that's going to close or exit. Okay, when we use those key combination, that's going to exit. Okay. So basically, let me just run the code again so you have an idea of what we are doing. Okay, so I run the code again. Time is up. Okay, so now you can see the file. You can see the file with F underlined. So if I press Alt F, you can see that it's showing. If I press Alt E, it shows the undo. Okay, that's the mnemonics. Now, if I do Alt F and I come down to exit, you can see Control X. Okay, so the Control X is the key that will close the application, but now it's not working because I've not added any event to it, any action to it. Okay, so let's write the code there for that action quickly. So add an action event to the exit menu item. Okay. So what action are we adding? We want it to close. Okay. So we just say exit item dot add action listener. Okay, new action listener. Then it generates an override code for us. So what action do we want to be performed? We want to do a system dot exit into brackets 0 to brackets 0. Okay. So once we do the control plus X, it should perform this action where it will close the system. Okay. So let's run the code. This is our interface. Okay. So Alt F shows us the exit, new and exit. I go to exit and then I do Control X and then it closes the application. Are we all here?
Yes, sir, we are here.
So basically, in fact, today we've done a lot. Okay, we've done a lot. We've looked at what GUI is about. We've done the theory part of developing application with GUI. Then we've done the practical part. Any question? Any question? The video will be made available together with last week's video on exception by tomorrow, as well as this code also on the LMS by tomorrow, and the code on the exception, so that you try them out. Next week, we are having our first quiz. Okay, we'll be having, I think, 2 quizzes next week. So please prepare accordingly. The quiz will cover the recap of what we did last semester, together with exceptions, print writer, and things we did last week, and what we've done today. Okay, it's going to be a quiz. Short questions. You provide the answer. So questions like, I may ask you, state 3 components in 3 swing components that are used in application development in GUI or desktop application development. So you state them: J button, J this, J that. Very simple quiz. Okay, can ask you what's the difference between an error and an exception. You should know all those basic things and prepare for it next week. Now we'll have the quiz. The lab period is 2 hours. Okay. So what I'll do is the quiz will start at the first period. Okay, so 2 hours. So within the first 1 hour, we'll have the quiz before the class starts. Okay, and we'll be doing it in the handout. So copies of the handout are available. See Eddie and get your copy. That's where we'll be doing the quiz. So please take note. And then also, next week, we'll be starting with the C class. So the C class will come in the morning from 7 to 9. Then the the A class will follow from 9 to 11. And then the Bs will come from 11 to 1 p.m., 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So please take note. I will share that on the class reps platform so that they distribute it. Yes, there's a hand up. Emmanuel Kwashi.
Sir, please, I wanted to ask, looking at other programming languages, when you are creating GUIs, you use HTML with maybe JavaScript or that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But it seems Java comes with its own inbuilt features that helps in doing that. So I wanted to know that, is it still possible to embed HTML codes or CSS or Bootstrap, like any of this, into Java code still?
Yes, it's possible. Okay. However, what we are doing here has to do with standalone application. Okay, now if you remember from last semester, if you can go back to the handout and refer, we looked at the platforms for Java application. Okay, there's the standard platform, the SE, okay, standard edition. There's the EE, which is the enterprise edition. Okay, now the enterprise edition, which has to do with enterprise application development. That particular approach allows you to do your HTML features in developing your application. Okay, so for instance, if I go to, if I'm creating a project, there's an option here. Can you see on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Java Enterprise.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that approach gives you options to do web-related applications. Okay, so with this one, you can embed your Bootstrap or your JavaScript, whatever, for your interface over here. Then you can write your Java code as the back end in it.
Yes, sir.
You get it? But what we are doing now is the standard edition. So the standard edition gives you the Swing components to design and build your desktop application, which we are doing. At the BTech level, you do enterprise application development, where you'll be introduced to the Java FX, which also has its own tool for designing an interface, which is called the Scene Builder. And then also you'll be introduced to the Java Enterprise platform, where we'll be using the HTML, CSS approach together with Bootstrap to design interface for application, which are mostly web-based application. I hope your question has been answered.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Yes, who else? Any other? Foley Prince, you said you have a question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Except when you select the Swing component, and doing it here, I mistakenly went to the horizontal spacer. And is there a way you can, let me say, undo, like delete it? Like, I mean.
So for instance, I add horizontal spaces are used to give space between your components. And the vertical spaces will give vertical space. Okay, so if I've done this horizontal space and I preview, you see some space in between them. depending on how I want it.
Okay.
So there's a space here. So if I want to delete it, just select it and then press delete. It's gone. Select it, press delete. It's gone.
I see. Thank you very much.
All right. Any other question? Please start practicing these things. You'll be looking at least, this is our first practical example. We'll look at about 3 more. Okay, 3 more, one of which will be adding a database to it. Even though in the handouts, there are about 7 different examples there. But we'll be looking at 3 more. Okay, with one being, in fact, we'll be looking at, I think, 2 more. Okay, one will be a more detailed one. The others you try, get the handouts, try them on your own. Okay, one will have a database to it. So please start practicing them so that you get used to it. In terms of exams, what happens is that when I bring this in exam, people are able to design the interface for me very well. Design the interface, nice, to add images, do this. Then when it gets to the coding part, it will only show me the code that was generated after designing the interface. That is all. People don't write the functionalities behind the code. So please, whilst you are learning how to design the interface, you also learn the code, how you write the code behind them. So you'll be completely perfect in the whole. Are we all here?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. And I can now?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I think we've exhausted our 2 hours. We've gone beyond that for today, but it's worth it. It's worth it for all that we've done. At least once the video is made available,